Welcome to our masterclass on building your go-to-market team. I'm Lindsay, a partner at Village Global. I'm joined today by two absolute maestros, Magna Sundstrom, who's a senior partner at SwingSearch, and Debbie Wissel, a president at SwingSearch. SwingSearch, they're partnering with us today for this awesome event. They're a recruiting firm focused on early stage startup hiring. For nearly 20 years, they've specialized in go-to-market roles at the director, head of, and VP levels, the hires that really matter the most to scaling companies like all of yours. They've worked with several Village global portfolio companies, including Multiverse, Growth Therapy, Mosaic Tech, Sora Schools, and they're currently partnering with MetaView and Alembic. Let's get this started. So, Magna, what's one mistake that you are 99% sure founders will make with their go-to-market team? True softball here.
Yeah, I think I'll start by saying mistakes will be made, right? And so I think, you'll hear me say this again, and I'll hit this note a lot. Perfection is the enemy of progress. And so what we really want to focus on is progress. But the mistake that I see most founders make is that when they're hiring those first go-to-market or early go-to-market members on their team, whether marketing, sales, whatever the role is they really default to going too senior. I think it makes a ton of sense, right? Because there's so much to get done. And oftentimes, you're looking at mountains and you want to see somebody who can see over the mountain. But what I always like to say is let's look for somebody who can see around corners, not necessarily over the mountain. And so you want to kind of bring that profile down to somebody who can do the tactical takeaway work that you need over the next 18 months. And so that's really where I see that mistake made, is going too senior, too into, just too many reps under their belt. And so, that's generally what I see.
And it makes sense, right? I mean, I think from a founder's perspective, you don't want to miss, right? And so you aim really high, assuming that, right, this person has done all of this work before, they'll clearly get it done for me, but there's a disconnect there. Can you talk at all about what that disconnect looks like, right? Like when you do hire the person who can see over the mountains, what do they how do they overcorrect? Yeah, what are some things you see?
Yeah, there's really two things that happen. And is you bring somebody in who's, let's say, you really need a seller, a hands-on seller. Somebody's going to come in, just drive revenue, execute deals, run, go. You bring in a VP of sales instead, or sort of somebody who's been there, has seen the reps, has managed large teams. They're going to ask for two things. And so they're going to immediately ask for a team underneath them to do that tactical work, right? And early stage, right? Cash is king. And so we want to make sure that we're driving revenue and not necessarily spending a whole bunch on headcount until that product market fit is built out and you start seeing that revenue, you see that traction. And so, they're going to, the second thing is they're going to want to spend their time on the work of building the foundation. And so, and by that, I mean, they're going to come to you and be like, well, we don't have territories. We don't have, verticals. We don't have all these things. And you're like, we're throwing spaghetti against the wall right now. And so, the work that they're doing is very much needed, but at just a slightly later stage. If you're really early hiring those hands-on tactical 18 months, and again, you want somebody, I would say, with a bit of maturity, a bit of seniority. It's always better to hire a little bit more of that up and comer, because you can layer them down the line, or you can kind of bring in that executive presence as you need a little bit later. But you need somebody who's going to be doing the outbounding. You need somebody who's going to be doing the calling. You need somebody who's going to be chasing these deals, who's going to be really driving that forward. And a lot of times, sales is past that in their career, and they just don't want to spend the time doing that. So. Yeah.
I love the throwing spaghetti at the wall, right?
Yeah.
Like so much of early startup, not just go-to-market teams, but really on the product side, we see that the imagery is really no one wants to admit that we're throwing spaghetti at the wall, but you're just hoping it'll stick, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Lindsay,
Now, while we were prepping for this, you also had an answer to that. What is one mistake you're 99% sure a founder will make?
Yeah. This is something that I'm pretty adamant about because I've seen it a lot. But it's that they'll hire too early. That they'll really try to solve a product market fit problem with a go-to-market hire.
Mhm.
Um, and it's it's so painful because it ends up being like an oil and water problem, right? You bring on you put all this effort to bring on someone, a good go-to-market person with a specific set of skills that are almost orthogonal to what you need in terms of product, right? So much of product market fit, talking to customers, understanding what they want. It takes so much time, and you really can't, I think, graft onto that a selling motion.
Yeah.
So when my portfolio founders tell me they want to hire a go-to-market person immediately, I'm like, like, okay, let's take a step back because it's usually too soon.
Yeah. Yeah. I have an interesting story. I know sort of founders, there's so much that's going on and you're so heavily focused on the problem and building the product for the problem. And that's really where you want to spend your time.
Mm,
Uh, but the reality is you're never going to leave sales. I remember I hopped off of a call, or I was waiting for a client to join a call. The company was 100 million plus in ARR, and the client was and we were hiring for a go-to-market role, a CMO for them. And the client hopped on and was like, I'm so sorry I'm late. I just got off a sales call that ran long. So this is a 100 million revenue company that the CEO, founder CEO, is still attending sales calls. So it's just like, that is never going to go away. You're always going to be in go-to-market. You're always going to be in sales. And the instinct is to be like, oh, let me hand it over to an expert. But like, you are always going to be the best seller, even when you're late stage. Now, of course, your time is prioritized different when you're $100 million revenue,
sure.
not jumping on the, 100K deal, but like, you're always going to be in those deals.
I agree. It's the gold standard, and we'll talk more about this, I think, today. But yeah, I mean, so founders are always in selling mode, right? They're selling, the folks to come work with them. They're selling a product. It's they're selling investors, right? It's never ending, and I think that message bears repeating. Like I talk to very, very early stage founders about it all the time, that this is literally the job that you're signing up for, is a sales job.
Yeah.
So man, let's get good at it, and of course bring on help.
Yeah, and that kind of leads to some of the questions that were submitted before this. One of the general themes was like, how do I define our founding go-to-market role, and how do I evaluate what should come first?
Mm.
Magna, I know that's a question that you hear often. And where do you kind of start that conversation with founders?
Yeah. So the conversation starts actually kind of where we started, which is my first question is going to be, what's your product? Who's your buyer? How are you selling today? What's the motion that you're looking to build? Right. And I think all of that matters into who is going to be the right person to help you build. Where you are from a stage perspective, but also where you are from a go-to-market perspective, just to kind of simplify that. And to me, that really is, so let's take two sort of very clear examples. B2B, you're going to start with the seller, most likely. B2C, you're going to start with a marketer, most likely, right? Because that's just the go-to-market motion that you have kind of that you've built. And that's, how the company is going to be built. So when you start to think about who's in seat, who's going to come in, and then you go that layer lower where you're like, what's my go-to-market motion? Are we enterprise? Are we mid-market? Are we SMB? Do we have a PLG motion in our product? Are we B2B to C, right? Understanding all of those things will help you start to define and refine on who's going to be the right person in the seat. So anytime somebody says like, who should I hire? I'm like, well, I've got 12 questions for you before I answer that. And so, and then going into kind of product market fit, where are you from a revenue perspective? Like from a customer perspective, do you have 2 customers? Do you have 100 customers, right? And so trying to understand a bit more about that.
And to put you a bit on the spot here, how often do folks approach you for that conversation and you actually say, you know what, it's not the right time. Go and figure this out. Do you see that?
Yeah, we do see that. I would say because most of our partnerships at Swing are through, places like Village, that we, a lot of times that filtering by the time it comes to us as a search firm is done, but we do get a lot of referrals from our previous clients. And that's going to be my first questions. So more often than not, I'm going to see that from a referral from a client where they're going to connect and I'm going to say, hey, I don't think you're really ready for this right now, or the role that you think you want is probably not the right role. And when we talk to prospective clients, that's the first thing that we're trying to figure out is, are we the right solution for you right now? And so, because there's nothing wrong, there's nothing worse than us getting into a partnership that's just not going to work for whatever reason. Sometimes, I'll be completely honest, we had this happen one time with a client where the discovery happens in the process, where the product wasn't where it needed to be. And so the persona and the profile that we had aligned on, we had in the process of the discovery, we felt like the product was farther along than it was as being slightly farther along than it actually was. And then as you're getting feedback and you're digging more and learning more about the product, we're like, oh, what you're trying to hire for is actually, there's a reason why this isn't working. And quite candidly, if you put somebody into this seat, it's actually, they're going to cycle out in 6 months, because this is not actually end up being the right person for you right now. You need to go back, focus on product, get to this to a certain specific place, and then kind of bring that forward, and then bring a go-to-market person on. So, yeah.
Difficult but necessary conversations, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's best to sort of, I mean, what an experience in many ways, right? To have that opportunity to say, like, whoa, let's put on the brakes. Kind of related to this, where do you think folks get tripped up the most in terms of early stage founders, right? Where do they get stuck? Where do you notice the most disconnects in the conversations you have with them?
Yeah, man. I think it's where I see a lot of the sort of the get stuck is when founders are unsure or about making a decision about something. Again, I think that you're going to hear me say this a million times, that leads back to perfection is the enemy of progress, right? And one of the things, I was just reading a quote this morning, actually flipping through LinkedIn, that came on, that was something along the lines of like, look, as a founder, you're going to constantly be making decisions based off of incomplete information. That is just like going to be part of your job. And so you have to get good at that. And sometimes you're going to make mistakes, and you have to get good at sort of like owning those mistakes, correcting them, when you can, and like as you can, and moving quickly beyond that. That happens in hiring. It's going to happen on product decisions. It's going to happen on, other strategic decisions, right? Because you just have incomplete information. And the fact of the matter is, hiring is always incomplete information. You're always taking a little bit of a leap of faith. Even if you're looking at past experience and you're saying, hey, they were super successful here, they were super successful, similar buyer, similar motion, similar product, right? At similar stage of growth, 5 million to 10 million, 1 to 10, right? They've done all of this. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to end up being the right environment, the right place, the right time in their life. There's a million things that come into play there. And you just have it, it's asymmetry of information. It always happens in hiring. Right? So you have to take the leap. And so one of the things I always talk about, I think that, there's 2 areas of search, right? You talk about in kind of like defining the role, focusing kind of on what do we need? What do we need to hire? And then once you've kind of gotten that, and it's startup, right? So it's a little malleable. You're sort of like, hey, this is like a ball of clay, and we've kind of shaped it into a box, and this is kind of the box that we need, right? Maybe it's a little bit too tall, maybe it's a little bit, smaller, but like we'll adjust it, but it's generally going to be this box, right? So once you've gotten to that point, I think what I always remind people is like, we are moving candidates through as if we're going to say yes until we get to a no, because every stage we're going to pull back a layer on that candidate, and we're going to do a little bit of discovery, and you're going to learn something. So hopefully we've defined early in the process, right? Go to your network, talk to people sitting in seat, understand what the role is, get as deep as you can. And then once you have that, you feel confident about that, then move candidates forward and get to that point of making the decision. And at the end, you're always going to be making a leap of faith. But by the way, it's also on the candidate side. Like, you're asking them to come early. You're asking them to come to like, hey, we're early product market fit. Maybe we're pre-product market fit. Maybe, we're starting to see some scale, but like, we're very like, they are also taking a leap of faith. So ultimately you guys have to like clasp hands and jump together. And
so well said. There's so much to dig into there. 2 things I want to pull out. One is conviction, right? As you're talking through this, it just reminds me of the investment process, right? Like, we're doing the same thing as we meet founders early on in the journey, right? You're getting to know them. You're talking to your network. You're talking to their network. It's all about building conviction, right?
Yeah.
And I think that is such a something that's in short supply, right? Like the hardest investments are the ones where you can see an investor kind of wavering on their conviction, right? Because everyone wants to get behind something. It's harder to be like, let's get into the messy stuff. So I super appreciate that point, right? As a founder, you've got to be convicted. On the other side of that, we chatted about this a bit yesterday, vibes, right? So we've got vibe coding, maybe vibe investing, vibe hiring. Is there such a thing as vibe hiring? And if so, what is it that has to be vibed, right? Like what
Yeah.
is it, just conviction? Like curious there.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Vibe hiring, you're starting to see it a lot. It makes sense, right? It's the word of the year, I would say. Vibe hiring is sort of like a rebrand of what I would say in 2015 was the culture interview, right? You kind of come in, and what you're really looking for is you're saying, hey, is this person going to be my person, right? Like, are they going to, and it's so easy in the hiring process. Is part of the reason why, and I'm going to sort of take us a little tangent here, but it's part of the reason why we also really enforce process in the course of hiring, like defining what is the scorecard, what are the things that we need this person to do, being super clear about like what the tactical takeaways are. We have all of our clients run through a process called, it's MOC, it's missions, outcomes, and competencies. And I think it was originally an A16Z thing, but it's like, what is the mission of the role? What are the outcomes we want to see? And what are the competencies that relate to those outcomes that will give us those outcomes that we need to be hiring for? And if you even just get that down, you have a good sense of like who's going to be successful in the role for the tactical takeaway. I think on the flip side of that is like, who's going to be right for me as a founder? Who's going to be right for me as or as part of the early stage team too as well. If you hire somebody, I do think it's important, because if you hire somebody who doesn't vibe or like kind of clashes with the team, and you're fewer than 10 people at the company, it is felt. It is felt every day in every communication, in every Slack message that you get, and that can be draining, right? So I think there's a sense of, you do need to have conviction that this is the person that's going to be there when you're like in the right times, right? And so I think conviction is the word. Yeah.
Yeah. So a really tactical question here. I work a lot with technical founders. I'm a former technical founder myself. There are playbooks for hiring technical talent in terms of like getting them to work with your team ahead of time, right? They do, you can bring folks on for 3 to 5 day contracts, right? They can be committing code. Is there a version like that for go-to-market hires where you see them coming into an org and like literally working with people, ideally to avoid some of these things that you're suggesting?
Yeah. Where we see, and now in the return to office days, are kind of being able to go back to this, which is sort of the full day in office and doing some type of working session. So it's not quite the same way where you're coding together and in sort of that deep level, the way it does in a technical interview. But generally what you'll do is you'll have some type of project, some type of pre-work that the candidate comes with, and then you're going to do sort of a working session. So challenge ideas, assumptions, see how you work together, see how things happen. And when I was internal, because I was internal before I was external, we used to elect somebody to be the naysayer and to be like the challenger and to challenge an idea and to see how that person works in that environment. Because especially for the candidates that are like breezing through really quickly and they're saying all the right things, it's like, okay, in that yes moment, we also want to make sure we're doing our diligence too as well in the process. And so kind of be that challenger. One of the things that, I do caution on in an interview process, and especially if you're hiring those like founding AEs, first in seat sellers, is like, it's such high demand right now that we want to make sure that interview process is clean, crisp, clear, and kind of engaging the candidate through that. So spending a day working with a team or 3 days in office, because we're often talking to passive candidates, so they already have a job. Yeah. So we're trying to balance. But that working session, I think, pulls out a lot of that. How do we communicate? How do we talk together? And candidates really like it, by the way, because they see how the team talks to each other.
Yeah.
and they see how the team works.
Always, it's always a two-way, it's always bi-directional. Like,
Yeah,
you've got to be aware of
100%.
that.
Yeah.
The hiring exercise should never be a tool for perfection. Because again, if it's counterproductive to progress, then it's too much, especially in this candidate market for sales and marketing.
Yeah.
For sure. So there's another thing to dig in there in terms of what you just said, which is, some of these candidates breeze through. They've done this job multiple times. It's kind of their gig, right? As they come early stage and they stay for a couple years maybe, but they keep doing these roles. One fear that folks have, and I think this came up in the questions, is how do you kind of check to make sure you're not being sold by a seller, right? Like, what do you do there?
Yeah. So my clear takeaway when I'm on a call with a seller or a marketer, it can be any kind of it can be a brand, a very creative marketer, it can be a seller, is like, if they don't know their metrics, they're probably not the strongest candidate. And I'm talking like detailed metrics. Like, there's a difference between somebody saying, I had 100% quota attainment, between I had 112.2% quota attainment. And had I gotten that last deal in under the wire, I would have had 122%. And I'm super bummed that I didn't hit that, right? Like, that is the difference there. The other question that I have, and this is, when you're hiring for sellers, it is the question that I always ask, which it's not just attainment, but then it's also where did you rank against other sellers, right? Were you in the top 3, the number 1? Because maybe that most of that team, maybe 70% of that team was above 100%, and they sound great, but they're in the bottom, quartile or the bottom 0.5% of everybody else. So it's not only just like, what did they attain, but how did they rank against their peers that were also selling.
So I'm curious to hear from both of you, Magna and Debbie, around like, what's your speculation as to why that makes a difference, right? That 112.2 versus, I was really good. Like, it's a fascinating observation. And you've both been in this business for a while. So what do you think makes that difference?
I think it's two things. So I think it's like, look, sellers are competitive by nature, right? They know where they rank, they know where they sit, they know where they are against, they know what their goals are. Like, you want a seller who's coin operated, right? And that person should be like VP of sales to, like an AE to a BDR. Like, you want them to be coin operated because that's their job, right? To drive revenue. And so you want them.
It's so well said. I never thought of it before, but yeah.
And so they know where they rank. So they know exactly where those numbers are because they're personally motivated to hit those numbers. So I think there's a bit of ambition or drive that comes with that. But then I think there's a component of like intellectual rigor and discipline that comes with knowing the number so detailed, right? And so if somebody's like, I know I got above 100%, but I'm not like really 100%, I'm not sure what that number is. I'm like, where's the like discipline and the rigor around that, right? And so I think it's the two things that I look for, because sales is 80% process repetition. It's just like 80% like, just working, like going after those deals, being that gritty, kind of going through. And especially for those sellers, like getting to that, that DNA. So you want somebody who's got discipline and ambition. So.
Magna, I think a follow-up question to that is like, when I hear your overview of that, I'm like, yes, that is exactly what I want for my 2nd through nth seller.
Yeah.
But for the founding AE, which I know many people on this call want to hire, there's a little also more communication needed for that founding AE. They have to report back to the CEO. They have to partner with the product team. Would you still say that metric number is as important for the founding AE?
Yeah, because I would say it for a CRO knows their team, right? And so like a CRO of a $200 million, like a strong CRO is going to know how they're hitting against the quota, how the company's doing, right? Like what they're doing from a revenue perspective. So I don't think that ever goes away. So I still think that's like a good litmus test to understand if somebody's like selling you in the interview process or actually very good at their job, kind of going back to that original question of like, how do I determine? So I think it's still a good litmus test. But what I would say is that, yes, with that founding AE, what comes into play here a bit is really I think that maturity and that ability to kind of come in and understand and have strong enough business acumen to understand that the conversations that they're having with customers, they need to feed that back to product, right? To have enough years and repetition that you can put them in front of, you know, a seasoned buyer or like a CRO or a CFO, regardless of, you know, whoever your buyer is, right? That they can sit in front of that call and they can, you know, do that first initial discovery call, and you know, they're not going to say anything crazy, right? So, you know, I think there's a bit of that too as well. But I think that, like, I honestly, I don't think you ever lose ambition, and I don't think you ever lose, you know, the discipline, and I don't think you ever lose the coin operated aspect, right? And so I think people who are good at those three things are the ones who, you know, rise through ranks. Yeah.
I really I want to dig in a little bit to something you said around 80% of the job is like process and right, they're like things to do, 20% question mark for me. But I want to fill in that question mark a little bit with tools, right? So we're jumping around a little bit, but we're super curious to hear, you know, your N is much higher than mine is here. Like, what are the tools that you see teams using now that really like bridge gaps and you know, accelerate particularly early hires?
Yeah, it's kind of like it's a great time to be in go-to-market right now. If you're sort of curious, AI is it's, I think, going to impact go-to-market tooling and we've already seen it in a significant way in a variety of different ways. So I think, you know, there's a lot of things out there right now. So if we just take sort of top of funnel from a prospecting perspective, there's companies like Common Room, like Pocus, like Clay that are out there that are making prospecting easier. And what you're really trying to do, we used to have this, I mean, we have always had this concept of like the 10x engineer, right? The engineer who can do 10x the amount of work, right? Now what these tooling are doing is they're creating like the 10x BDR, the 10x AE, or the, you know, and so I think that there's a lot of tools out there, and that curiosity and that ability to kind of try different things, look at, you know, different tooling. And then, you know, one of the things that Debbie and I have chatted about before is that idea of like your first 10 hires are really important. Also, are your first 10 software selections of tools, right?
Totally agree. Yeah.
And so, and like, because what ends up happening is as a company scales and grows, like you're going to re-platform multiple times, right? For whatever it is. And so, and ultimately what you want is that tooling to expand as you expand until you have to re-platform, because re-platforming every 12 to 18 months is challenging, right?
And do you find that early hires like bring their own tools and that they come with a stack that they've used before, or does the CEO say, you know, here's what my friends recommend, like what do you see, what works best?
Yeah, I find that mostly early hires that you like at this stage that are going to be curious and they're going to be aware of the market, and they're going to be following blogs and thought leaders, and they're going to have suggestions and ideas. Some of this stuff, it's like launching and happening now. So, you know, there's some tools out there that are, you know, a bit more tried and true and kind of have some traction and some growth. And there's a lot of new things coming on, and we don't know what the market's going to look like, you know, as it relates to AI and adoption and, you know, in the next 18 to 24 months. Right. And so I think the right hires, especially for those founding AEs or first like heads of sales, like they should be coming with a perspective and a point of view on this, right?
Totally. Yeah. It sounds like that's what I was thinking. It sounds like that's like a great thing to come up in interviews, right? Is like, what's the stack we should build with? I again, it's so similar to investing in that I'm always looking for a strong point of view in the folks that I invest in, right? Whether it's about a product or a technical innovation. And again, it just seems consistent here, right? Like this is why what we're doing.
I would add on it's equally as important, if not more so important, than for marketers these days. So I know among our participants, about half are looking for their first sales hires, half are looking for their first marketing hire, kind of like leaning toward demand gen. And I think it's the marketer's role that's going to change so significantly over the next 18 months. So just that curiosity over what tools they're even using in their daily life outside of work will be also a good litmus test to how kind of tech forward they are and thinking about the marketing tech stack.
Yeah, I love that. And that's a shift, right? I mean, you've been in this business for a bit, but my sense is like this is new and exciting, right? This idea that whether it's because of product-led growth, folks can experience these tools in their, normal lives, but yeah, there's so much kind of ownership that folks can bring to this role.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I've seen candidates come and then just using, like low code or vibe coding, like with like full go-to-market tooling for the AE role that they're hiring for. Like they build like an MVP of a product that they're like, I would use this in this
Yeah.
role, and you're like, okay, you are a founding AE. You are like,
Yeah,
hire if you're building something for this company before you're even here. So
totally.
yeah.
Oh man, again, like gold standard, right? Like it's great to be able to identify that.
And that's something that's interesting. So marketing, we've talked a lot about sales, and that's kind of been the market more recently, which has been, it's been very heavily hiring in sales. Now, the thing that follows sales is marketing, right? So marketing is gonna heat up. And then like, I think in Q4 going into Q1 of next year, I think we're gonna see a lot more marketing roles just being hired broadly across both B2B and B2C. But I think the thing that marketers, sales is pretty straightforward, right? Like you have a motion, you've got a buyer, you want to find somebody who understands that, they have a quota, they have attainment, they have all of that. Marketing gets way more complex. And so, because when you start talking about the marketing function, and this is where you can really overhire, kind of going back to that initial question, because you're like, I want a growth, I want product marketing, I want brand, I want comms, I want, we're going to do some PR, I need a field marketer, I need, and all of those things, marketers are T-shaped, right? They grow up in one particular area. And the more that you want this person to have owned or overseen, the more senior they are in their career, right? Because you grow up product marketing or demand gen, let's say, and then you get to a point in your career where you start to own more areas of marketing, but you're not tactical, you're not hands-on. You just going back to perspective, point of view, like you understand how to manage and how to build those teams and how to make them effective, but you're not necessarily in the weeds, right? So that marketing role, it's almost more important upfront to really define, do I need a product marketer? Do I need a growth marketer, right? And then what do you get out of that? Because growth marketers, to Debbie's point, are going to be very metrics driven. And depending on where you are in that scale, right? Like they can be super, super metrics, like literally like they can almost talk like engineers, like they're like no creativity. You're like, how are you a marketer? Like they're so analytical. And then, two, like super just like, I just want to be creative and talk about, like our colors and our message and our brand and who we are in the market, right? Like, not that's a very important part of marketing, but, where they fall in that spectrum, like you have to really get very clear on where we need that person to fall. And if you want a growth marketer who's creative, right, that's like you're starting to get into unicorn status, and there's going to be, that's a small niche candidate pool that can really do both of those things well. So
Wow. Sorry, there's so much juice in there to squeeze or something. I don't know if, I was thinking like, leprechauns, four-leaf clovers. Turns out unicorn is the term I was looking for, and you hit the nail on the head. And at like, oh man, like everyone wants a unicorn. And my sense from getting to know you all is that so much of the value you bring is that you actually help folks identify that like, whoa, you're looking for a unicorn, and that's really unlikely. Let's break it down, let's sequence it. I'm also smiling because I grew up, at Airbnb, my first tech job on a growth team, and my wife is a growth marketer, so I don't know what that means about us, but very metrics driven. I was a data scientist. I guess this is this is a good segue, I think, to working with you all, right? And like, or search firms in general. Like, when does it make sense, or how, I guess, how do you help folks understand maybe why they should work with you versus finding other search firms?
Yeah. Great question. I'll start with kind of when I think you should think about outside support, and then we'll kind of dive
Great.
into what is the, what might be the right partner to have, and whether that's us or not. And so I think there's a few key triggers that would make me say, hey, this is the time to start to look for outside support.
Great.
And just really quickly for context, I was in-house before I was external. So I've been on both sides of the fence. And so I've hired the firms and have been at the firms that got hired. So I can kind of have seen it on both sides. And the triggers I would say is one is a whole lot of hiring, and we just don't have our team built out yet, because these moments are going to happen, right? You're going to raise your A, you're going to raise your B, you're going to raise your C, and all of a sudden you have to scale up super fast. It takes a while to hire recruiters. It takes a while to hire recruiting teams, just as every other role, right? And so the team is not there. So bringing in a firm to support when there's a gap, there's just like not the oversight. I think though what we're talking about more here today is really two things. So when you are hiring a role for the first time, whether that's go to market, whether that's finance, whether it's operations, whatever the role might be, definitely leverage your network, leverage your VC partners, leverage, to sort of help define that role. But if you need that help really kind of drilling down, understanding the market, quantifying, qualifying that market, calibrating into that, that's something that a search firm like Swing would be able to do. So oftentimes when we're talking with clients and we're doing that initial discovery call, what I might even parse out is like, okay, what I'm hearing is 3 different potential personas that could be here. We could get, and so like, instead of saying like, let's drill into one, I'm like, let's talk to all 3 and let's figure out how we feel about that. Right. And so sometimes that's the direction that we want to go, which is let's have the conversations. Let's figure out what's the right direction here. So I think that's 1 and 2. And then I would say, great. Yeah, the third one, which is kind of a looser one, which is just sort of a combination of the two. It's a very important role. And I would love for somebody to give me a better metaphor, because I always keep using, so like, I'm like, my email inbox is open, my LinkedIn's are open, but what I always use is like, a firm like Swing is we're going to be a spear, not a shotgun. I would like a less aggressive metaphor, but, and so when you really need to get to that niche talent, right? So you're like, because engaging top tier talent, A players, like they get bombarded all the time. And so what we are is we're the signal through the noise. So so not only do we have a network, we can reach out as Swing. I talk about this. This is another thing that, if we ever work together, you will hear me say this all the time. I'm like, the message, the medium, and the messenger, right? There's 3 things that you can use to engage a candidate. What is the message that you're saying? What's the medium? How are we out? And then who's the messenger, right? And so under those, the 3 levers that you have to pull in engagement of candidates is really important, because then it helps you set up that strategy. But if you're looking for that niche unicorn talent, you're like, I know this is a unicorn. I really want to get as close as I can to this unicorn. We really kind of need that right now, leveraging a firm that can spend the time doing the engagement, because we're literally talking about how do we warm network in? How do we leverage everybody, right? Like, this is what we spend all of our time doing, mapping that market, identifying the talent, and then engaging that talent, right? So when you need somebody to do that work, that's when you would leverage a firm. Yeah.
What would be one of the top things you can recommend to a founder to prepare for that journey? So I loved what you said about the 3 M's. I love alliteration, and I can't remember what the 3 M's are, but I know that there's something there. How can a partner best be suited to accompany you or in this journey? Like, how do they prep? Founders do so much, but are there certain things they should read? Are there podcasts they should listen to?
Yeah. I am always a big fan of First Round. I think that they do a lot of content around like how to hire. Specifically, they do a lot of like, specific roles. So if you want to kind of go through hiring your first head of product, hiring your first head of sales, there's a lot of different, that are out there that you can find of just like how to define a role, how to think about it, how to, bring that person in. I think the biggest thing though, was like in that kind of concept of discovery and defining the role is like talking to your network, talking to the people who sit in these seats already. And that's because the more you can do that, and look, sometimes the analogy, we're building the plane while we're flying. Sometimes you're like, I just got to hire this head of sales, or I just got to hire this marketer. Like, we're so far behind. I just got to hire, like, maybe you don't have the time to do quite that amount of definition. So then again, a firm like us will come help do that definition in process, meaning like, okay, defined it to these 3 personas. Let's figure out which one's the right persona. Right. And so, but the more definition and defining you can do in advance, the better prepared you're going to be to run that search, because it all sort of ties together, it cascades down, because like, if you have that profile clearly identified, the challenge with the 3 personas and going to market with that is that's going to take time. And then thinking on the other side, the candidate experience of like, I had a conversation, it's 2-3 weeks until I have another conversation, and then maybe it's another week and a half. And then, so the more you can kind of get clarity, as much clarity as you can, and getting that kind of clay into the box the better you'll be to run that smooth process. And, and again, working towards like finding that conviction quickly, because you have that defined as much as possible.
Yeah, it's a good opportunity to mention really quickly, founder Slack at Village, right? I think everyone here is on it. A great space to ask, if you don't have marketers in your network, ask fellow founders, and of course, reach out to your partners at Village who can facilitate those conversations. It's so simple, right? Just have more conversations, right? But those conversations, you also want to be efficient and have them be targeted.
Yeah.
I'd add one other thing, which is the things that someone should look for in choosing a recruiting partner is that this person's going to represent you to the best talent on the market. So make sure you're confident with how they're positioning your company and speaking about you and the company that you're building. You also, the person and the company that you partner with should make you better at hiring every day after you start working with them. So you're not just focused on your head of sales. At early stage, you're really building your hiring muscle. What do I need to learn about hiring that I can carry forward after this role? And then I'd say for a founder to be prepared, once you bring in a recruiting partner, you haven't outsourced the challenge. We actually need your active involvement and participation. We need your time, we need your calendar, and we need your quick feedback, especially if you want to make this hire within, 60 to 70 days. It's not like, okay, great, I've got a partner working on it, it sounds good. It's like, oh man, I have a partner on it. They're really demanding. They need my time.
Yeah.
So
100%.
And if a recruiting agency is not asking for that, it's a red flag.
Yeah. I would say where that type, so there's recruiting agencies, I think for the like founding AEs, like early teams, your VPs of sales, your like really sort of like impactful roles. Even founding BDRs, I would use a firm like Swing, where we're going to come in and demand the time just to, and really kind of understand. If you're at a stage where, or I should say, if, when you get to the stage where you're going to say, hey, I just need to go hire 20 BDRs, like use a contingency firm if you're not there. And so, use a firm that's going to just do high volume and again, for those lower level roles, just like where you would sit in the market, like BDRs, a lot of times we use contingency on the engineering side is really common because there's just like a huge talent pool. But that's why I like to say is like, again, I'm open to metaphors, spear versus shotgun. Like if you need to hire, 20 BDRs, you might want a shotgun at that point. So again, we got to open the metaphor. Debbie,
I'll work on that.
I'm thinking like a fishing net or something.
Just like fishing net, versus line, like that, like fishing line versus fishing net, like that. 20 BDRs, you want a net, right? So, not a fishing line.
We have about 8 minutes left, and we can go different ways. I want to ask Debbie, are there things that we didn't talk about that we should?
Yeah. Well, one thing that didn't come up, because we do want to be sensitive of headcount, but one thing that comes up in sales is like, well, if you need to hire 1, are you sure you don't need to hire 2? Magna, do you want to talk a little more about that?
Yeah, so there's 2 kind of prevailing thoughts on building your go-to-market, your sales team. Let me be specific there. Your sales team, which is hiring that first head of sales, right? It's going to be slightly more senior, going to build the foundation, going to build the scale, going to be thinking about, kind of building for scale. And then there's hiring 2 account executives. And so bringing in 2 AEs who are going to be sellers, who are going to be in the market side by side, kind of selling into the market. They're not going to necessarily be thinking about territories and commission plans and, foundations and playbooks and stuff. You're going to kind of like let them run and go. And so when we think about that model of like, hey, I'm going to hire 2 account executives, and this is painting with a broad strokes, right? But like generally you would maybe go that direction if you are a little bit earlier in product market fit, you're a little bit earlier in revenue, and we're kind of a bit more just like, hey, we're just going to drive, like we just need more like out there driving volume, driving conversations, driving things forward, versus like we're a bit later, we're starting to scale, we're starting to grow, and we need to lay foundation for scale, right? And so, but when you think about that, like a lot of times what will happen is somebody will say like, okay, well, I just want to hire 1 account executive. And so, and I always question that, because I'm like, if you're not ready to hire 2 and really start to like drive that forward, then is this still a product question, right? Are we still trying to figure out something at a product level? Because really by the time you get sellers in seat, it's like we have enough information that we're ready, and we have enough traction that we're ready to sell. And so that's kind of like what I think about when I think about that.
And are there benefits you see of like additional benefits of having 2 folks start at the same time in these sales roles? Like,
yeah,
what happens there?
Trenches together. So there's 2 benefits, and they seem contradictory, but they're not. So one, they're in the trenches together. And so, because you're early stage, it's a lot of hard work. You're trying to sell a product without a brand, without a name, right? It's a lot of, that drive. So you have kind of a partner. And then you also, again, going back to the persona that makes a good seller, like they're competitive. They have something to compete against. And there's kind of a third thing I would say there, which is, again, going way back to the beginning of the call, we talked about if we make a mistake, right? If you hire 2 AEs and one of them doesn't work out, you still have 1 AE that's driving revenue, right? So I think there's a few different benefits to those 2 AEs versus that founding AE is a little bit between the 2 of them. And I think for that, I would probably think about that role if like you're a very technical founder, and so you just need help being in those conversations with the partners, right? And so because that founding is going to have more reps, more maturity, they're not going to have built a team, but they will have maturity at a seller level, right?
So this may be a tough question, but I'm routinely intrigued by it, which is, okay, let's imagine we want to hire 2. They can, work together, also be competitive. Do you suggest, and maybe it depends, my guess is the answer, it depends, but like, do you suggest 2 spiky types, like folks who spike in the same way? Do you suggest complementary types? There's so many different theories out there. Like, what have you seen that works, particularly in that founding moment, right?
Yeah. I think you're filling so many holes that I would probably find 2 different spikes, whatever those spikes are. And so there's so many gaps, and that could be, somebody who's more, commercial moving to mid-market, and then somebody who's more mid-market moving to enterprise. So somebody is slightly more complex deals, somebody's a bit more transactional, right? Because they can balance each other out and sort of their strengths. It could be a vertical, right? And so, or a segment they sell into. We find ourselves selling into, security and, financial services, right? So maybe somebody who understands security, somebody who understands financial services, and you can kind of set them off together in that way. I think oftentimes you're trying to cover so many gaps. And this is also, again, we didn't mention this, but when you're trying to think about like scoping out the role and thinking about what's right, is like being really like honest with yourself and saying like, what am I good at and what am I not good at, right? And like really, and like hiring for gaps, like you do that when you're like your early leadership team, right? Is like you're hiring for your gaps. And so when you're thinking about that early team, I think about it as like hiring for those gaps. But to the point, Lindsay, it might depend, right? Just on like the needs are.
The other quick nugget I'd leave the group with is that with early stage startups, often you're going to be hiring on potential. Someone who you believe can do it and has the the skill set and the capabilities to do it, but hasn't done it yet, in which case they're going to need to be trained. And one thing, founders are moving so quickly. One thing to keep in mind is that you cannot delegate it if you can't write it down. Document, as soon as you start making your first hires, documentation becomes so important, especially when it's something as important to the brand as a salesperson representing the company. So don't sell short that need for documentation and onboarding at the beginning.
Yes, yes.
Awesome. This was, I learned so much. I hope others did as well. The last note I want to leave on is in prep for this conversation, we talked about how engaging talent is like doing the laundry. Do you guys want to shed some light onto that? If we can leave on that note.
Well, I'll say that I also had my career in startups before coming over to SwingSearch to help run the company. And one of those startups, LearnVest, was about financial planning. And one of our wonderful financial planners said, savings like doing the laundry. It's never really done. So you can have these like milestones that you achieve, but you got to do it again next week. And hiring is kind of like that. You always need to be thinking about what talent you're talking to, keeping them kind of like warm, making sure they know you as a leader, where you're headed for the company, so that even if you're not looking to bring them on now, 6 months from now, you know who to call, even for referrals or to understand what it looks like.
Yeah.
You're always recruiting. As you said at the beginning of the call, you're recruiting investors, customers, and talent.
Yeah.
That's the job, actually. Thank you so much, Magna and Debbie. I learned a lot. I know I just said that, but I learned so much. I had to keep saying it. It was a pleasure.